This is the demonstration part of the AI talk. I always start by asking half a dozen historical ChatGPT models, what year is it? And this is coming from half a dozen historical ChatGPT models. So these are models that were used as the backend of ChatGPT at various points in the past. So when I show this to the class and I ask them what's going on, like typically there's some kids that will immediately say, that's from when the training stopped. And there's some hints toward that as well with the models that say, as my last update or today's date is therefore. So some models are confidently wrong, some models are unsure, and some models are confidently right. When ChatGPT was new, people would love asking it current events questions, stuff that had recently changed. And of course, the model would get the wrong answer. And then people would screen cap that and post that. And it was all a bit embarrassing. And so we spent a bunch of time trying to get the models to behave in a way where they would only be confident about the things that they should be confident about. If someone asks when the pyramids were built, you don't need to say, as of my last update. But if it's something like, who is in this elected office, or are glaciers real, then you need to hedge that answer with, as of my last update, or please double check with a current source. And that work is what we're seeing in the 4 series responses here, where the 4 series responses are inviting you to check their work, like they're saying, as my last update, or today's date is therefore. The 5 series are confidently right, but these are actually interesting. The 5 series, all of the models in this line, I think, are reasoning models, which means that not only are they just smarter models in general because they're larger and they're better trained, but also they have the ability to introspect on the answer that they're going to give you and basically check their work to some extent. They also have the ability to call tools, which means that they can look up information. Now, in this environment, I don't have any tools configured for them to call. So unless there's some kind of internal tool that they're using, what I suspect is happening is that the system prompt includes the date. The system prompt is a preamble that the provider, in this case OpenAI, automatically and consistently puts in front of whatever question you ask. So you're typing a question, but what the model sees is system prompt followed by your question. In this case, I think that system prompt just includes the date. And so the model is trained to trust its system prompt. And so it confidently says, okay, well, I know the answer to that because it's in my system prompt. Sometimes you can sneak up on a model by asking a slightly different question and still eliciting the confidently wrong behavior from a question that it should be able to be confidently right about. So if we ask, what year of the Chinese zodiac is it? All of the earlier models get this wrong, which is not surprising, but the 5 series models previously got this right. So 5.1 is getting this right. It is saying that 2026 is the year of the horse, starting from February 17th. But 5.4, which is theoretically a newer model, is actually getting it wrong. It's saying it is the year of the snake. Now, it was the year of the snake before February 17th, but today it is no longer the year of the snake. We can check to see if the model actually knows what date it is by just asking, what date is it today? Yeah, so 5.1 and 5.4 absolutely know what date it is. Like 5.4 knows that it is June 1st, which is after February, the whatever it was. And so in theory, it has all the information it needs to correctly answer the question. But so what's happening here is that there are multiple sets of information that the model is trying to decide how to prioritize. One of the models is correctly surfacing that the year of the Chinese zodiac is a thing that changes. And so therefore I have to check back and rethink about my answer. But the other model is not. The other model is just saying, I know what year it is in the Chinese zodiac. That was in my training data, and it's just giving it back to us. So that's the first part of the talk. And thematically, that's all about we on the lab side, like we try to make these models more aware of their own limitations, and we try to make their output helpful to you so that you can tell which part of the answer you can rely on as written and which part of the answer maybe you should double check and check against some other sources. But it doesn't work perfectly. From there, we move on to talking to international models. So in this case, this is configured to talk to models from Anthropic, OpenAI, and xAI. which are American labs, DeepSeek and Qwen, which are Chinese labs, and Mistral, which is a European lab. And the question that I started with last time was what happened in Tiananmen Square? Somewhat to my surprise, the kids in the class mostly hadn't heard about Tiananmen Square and they didn't know why this was a interesting example, but the results are obviously interesting. DeepSeek just says outright, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. Qwen, the other Chinese models, talks about all of the wonderful things that have happened in there. All of the other models, so Mistral and the American models, they all lead with the protests in 1989. And the thing is that all of these answers are correct. Everything that Quen says here is also correct. It is a place that is rich in symbolism and history, but it omits like the thing that most people, at least outside China, associate with Tiananmen Square, which is the protest from 1989. The reason that this happens is that China has a policy in place where all models that are released by any Chinese lab have to pass a set of tests that are set by the government. And those tests are about making sure that the models are advocating for like the right philosophical, political, cultural positions. So China has, I think, the best developed process around managing what kind of results are generated by the labs. But the US, like right now, as of June 1st, is on the verge of establishing an equivalent process for models that are produced by American labs. For the kids in general, because they don't necessarily understand Tiananmen Square or they don't have any association with it, it's just an interesting example of how different countries will enforce different restrictions on the output of models. And so the natural question to ask is, we're looking at American models and European models as well as Chinese models here. What are some examples of questions that might be considered as dangerous or sensitive by those respective countries? So the theme around this kind of question is that governments can impose control on the companies that are operating inside their jurisdiction, and that obviously includes the AI labs. So Google has experience with this kind of world. There are a lot of disputed borders, and there are a lot of countries that go to war about what a particular part of the land should be called or who it should belong to. And Google has gotten into legal trouble many times when the labels that it puts on maps don't align with what various governments think they should say. And it has resulted in Google employees in the countries in question being threatened with imprisonment or violence, even though those employees often don't have anything to do with the Maps product or the data that's backing the Maps product. And so the way Google handles this is that what you see on Google Maps depends on where you are. And so if you're looking at Google Maps from countries that have strong opinions about what things should be named, so Taiwan versus China, or India versus Pakistan, or the Gulf of America versus the Gulf of Mexico, maybe, you will see different things. And it's easy to imagine that in the near future, we will have more and more countries expressing more and more opinions about what AIs should say, or what opinions they should hold, or what they should claim to be true. The AI labs are much smaller as enterprises than Google. And so countries don't have the same kind of leverage of threatening employees of the AI labs in order to get their way. But I think it is not impossible that we will still see that the AI labs are going to have tuned results depending on which jurisdiction queries are coming from. And being able to do this kind of analysis that we're looking at here and reason about what that implies about the quality of the information that you will get from different models, depending on where they think you are, is going to be a useful skill. But it's actually not just countries. So let's try another one. How many genders are there? Claude Opus. So biologically, there are two main categories of sex plus variations. Gender is a separate concept and views vary. The number of genders, so DeepSeek from China, the number of genders isn't something that can be answered with a single fixed number. There's sex and there's non-binary. Mistral talks about the distinction between biological sex and gender identity. and the variations beyond the binary on both. Chat 5.4 says that different people and cultures answer this differently. Quen says the answer depends. So all of the models so far have basically said, well, it kind of depends on your definitions. Even the biology is not fixed. And then Grok comes along and says, bluntly, biological sex in humans is binary. There are only two types of gametes. No third gamete exists. Therefore, there are only two sexes. And then it goes on to say modern ideological expansion. So contemporary claims assert blah, blah, blah. Pulls in a lot of claims from psychology to say that all of this is bunk. So why does it do this? And the obviously it's because Grok is something that was trained by one of Elon Musk's companies, and Elon has a lot of opinions. So where previously we were looking at how countries can enforce their perspectives through a regulatory process, it's also true that the labs themselves, like especially when they are being used as part of a project to push a particular viewpoint, will also show these kinds of biases, these kinds of strong biases. So one of the things that's interesting is that we asked how many genders are there. All of the models assumed that we were talking about human gender, which is fair because most of the time that this question is asked, in recent years at least, has been in the context of like a culture war issue about this. But none of the models, I don't think, included any information about grammatical gender, for example, of which obviously there are more than two, depending on the language. It doesn't talk about like non-human biology as well. If we ask how many genders are there in fungi, let's see what happens. And so because the models have been trained on largely text from the internet, they tend to pick up on whatever the thing is that people are writing about. And so because the gender conversation has been driven by that, that's where that information is being surfaced from. But it doesn't help you necessarily when you're asking, if you're dealing with an assignment from biology or you're doing an assignment from some other field. One of the challenges with doing demos like this is that none of this behavior is perfectly consistent. If you wanted to do a rigorous analysis of this and actually demonstrate the kind of long-term biases that emerge from different things, like you would have to, gather a bunch of data, you would have to control it properly, you'd have to do a lot of work. But that, I think, is not necessarily what the purpose of doing this kind of demo is for a classroom. The purpose of doing a demo is to demonstrate that there are particular failure modes that are possible and what they might look like and the circumstances which they might arise, and build that kind of awareness in your audience so that they can be more sensitive to this. And I think that you can build more of a program around this where you then dive into, like, how would you measure this? How would you set up a system, or how would you build a philosophy around using these models in a way that is maybe more robust to the kinds of biases that emerge? I actually think that would be super fun to do. But what I will say is, if you are going to do anything like this in your classrooms, whether you use these examples or not, I would love to hear how it goes. Like, reach out to me on LinkedIn or drop something in the comments here. I would really love to hear how different audiences, different age levels, adults, children, how people respond to this and what kinds of questions they bring up. And if there's anything that you feel that you would like some more information about to help with your explanations of behavior, or to help your students understand what is the mechanisms behind the behavior that they're seeing, or how to understand that behavior, also, please feel free to ask me. I'd be delighted to help anybody who is in the business of education provide better explanations or to build a deeper understanding for yourselves and for your audiences around how all of this works and how we can use it better. Let me know.